r/AskReddit. Who's the stupidest person you've ever met, and what story perfectly sums up their stupidity? My in-laws came to visit us a few weeks ago. They got an abandoned flat nearby because our place is too small to accommodate them, and, well, Mill always does dumb stuff that infuriates me, so I can't have her around me 24/7. I go to pick them up in my car. Note that she had been in this car numerous times previously. Now, their saving grace is that they were ready for me on time. But to walk the approximate 50 yards from the front door to my car took about 5 minutes because Mill gets so easily distracted. Oh look, Frank. That looks like a frog, she says as she bends down to pick up a blob-shaped piece of metal that had been driven over hundreds of times. She shows it to Phil, Frank, and they stand in the middle of the street observing this thing. I'm on the other side of the street trying to beckon them onwards and away from this dirty piece of junk they've discovered. I'm also looking at all of the windows to see if anybody is watching this embarrassing stupidity. Finally, Mill starts moving again and tries to open the door of the car that happens to be closest to where I'm standing. Remember, she's been in my silver car many times. She's trying to open the door of a black car. How the alarm didn't go off I'll never know. She even asked me why I was standing next to a car that's not mine. Well, the street's jam-packed with parked cars and this just so happens to be the car that was closest to me when her display with the frog stopped me in my tracks. So we eventually get around the corner to where my car was parked. It's a busy narrow street with lots of traffic, so you don't want to be wasting any time getting into the car. One of them had to get in the side away from the pavement because the pavement side seat has my son's baby seat installed. They stood in the middle of this road holding up traffic while they looked for something to wrap this frog thing in. I'm feeling the heat and tell them to hurry up because it's dangerous and the cars who decided not to pass were getting impatient. Once they were finally in the car, Mill joked that I was talking to them as if they were my 2-year-old son. No, he's far more compliant. I was leasing an apartment and the landlord one day called me up and told me I had to move out immediately because they had a cousin who was going to move in from another state due to blah 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 story I don't care about and is not my problem. I reminded them that I had a lease with both our names on it which stated I had 6 months left there, so he needed to find some other arrangement for his cousin. End of conversation. A couple days later said cousin showed up with a key to the apartment and let themselves in, was very aggressive and in my face about wanting me to leave as soon as possible. I told them more or less to fuck off or I was gonna call the cops. They left but not without a big hissy fit. Next day I had the locks changed. A couple of days after that the cousin broke into the apartment, literally by kicking in a window, this being the place they were planning on living in. It so happened I was there at the time. As soon as I heard the banging on the door and then window I called the cops, and when the guy came in, they swiped the phone from my hand with the 911 call in progress and started yelling at the operator on the phone. I told him it's gonna go real well for you when the cops show up and you have my phone in your hand and a busted window in the apartment. You should probably go while you can. He did put the phone down and I snatched it back and we had a general TV drama shouting match for a minute, but I firmly refused to simply leave, especially since all my stuff was still there. Then he called the cops on me from his phone. I thanked him for doing that, since 2 911 calls from the same place are probably gonna get a faster response. Also my girlfriend was with me and his girlfriend, or sister, I don't really know tbh, they looked related, but maybe that's just the law of attraction, was with him, Bonnie and Clyde, so they got into their own side cat fight, and also both called the cops. 6 or 8 cops very quickly showed after all these calls, rammed in the door, and arrested the guy and girl immediately with guns drawn on them, with him protesting in a very rude manner to the cops that I should be arrested because his uncle said he could move in. Yeah, that's obviously gonna go well for you. I was seriously amazed at how many cops piled into this apartment, at least a half dozen, completely overwhelming odds even to people that stupid having an absolute wall of guns drawn got through to them because the one smart thing they did was allow themselves to be handcuffed without resisting, even though he was muttering about this is bullshit the whole time and the girl just had this resigned and frankly pathetic look that made it clear this Wasn't the first time this guy had screwed up and dragged her into a bad situation. I never saw them again or heard any more from the landlord. Gave a basic report to the cops on the scene and showed them the lease and my ID. Never heard from them again either, so I don't know how it worked out for the family. Shortly after this happened, the landlord shut off the power and water. Talked to a lawyer about my rights, but decided it just wasn't worth having a confrontation that might drag on for some time while I'm living in a place with no heat or running water in the dead of winter with a busted window and door kicked in, so I moved out as fast as I could. I did leave them with a nice fridge full of rotting food and a seriously nasty toilet, and didn't pay rent the last month I was there, cause I didn't expect to get the deposit back at that point. The smell of rotting turkey from that fridge surely permeated the carpet. So, At the pre-cell phone era time, I worked in a machine shop that had mostly male employees. When I was invited to camp with a few of them, I decided to go. I liked camping and boating and had no reason not to, so I drive my own car. Boss drives his. 2 others drive theirs. But Dumas, he left his apartment in his car, towing a trailer with his boat, only to break down on the highway a few miles from home. When someone stops to offer help, instead of doing something intelligent like, say, going home and fixing his car, he leaves his car on the shoulder of the highway and manages to talk the Good Samaritan into towing his boat to the lake. He gets there and launches into the first of many comments about how his car broke down because I was there. It's just like having a woman on a boat, he said, over and over and over again. Well, whatever. The entire group climbs into the 2 boats, his and the supervisor's, to go fishing on the water. As dusk sets in, they need to get the boat's lights on, but Dumas's boat doesn't actually have lights, so he borrows a flashlight from the supervisor to tie to the boat. Except, oops, he drops it in the water before he can. Cue more comments about a woman on a boat, except I was not actually on the boat he was on. So, it's getting darker. Supervisor asks if anyone wants to sleep on his boat, and I opt to because I don't really want to hear any more from Dumas, because I could very well get into it with him over his idiotic remarks about me being there. Next morning, I heard about all the excitement I'd missed. Dumas tried to get back to camp, but landed a mile downshore, where he left his boat while trying to find the campsite. He finally finds the tents and sits drinking with everyone till the wee hours of the morning, complaining all the while about a woman's presence. Eventually, he pulls out a gun he has packed and lets off a few rounds into the sky before others convinced him to shut up and sleep it off. Of course, he hasn't actually brought a tent, so he rolls out some blankets near the campfire. You bet, it caught on fire. Next day, we are getting ready to leave. He asks me to give him a ride back to his apartment. He actually asked me to tow his boat first, and when I said no, decided he would come back for it because everyone else noped out of it. I once worked a job that involved vehicles with advertisements on them. While the advertisement wasn't our main product, it did bring in a fairly hefty income to a company that ran vehicles who, by nature, soak up cash like a sponge soaks water. We had one vehicle that didn't have the traditional ads on the side underneath the windows, but was rather wrapped in vinyl with an advertisement over every square inch of the outside except the operator's windows. This car was very popular with our general manager despite its overall shittiness, because every day it was recorded as being in service. We got almost as much money as the other vehicles combined brought in. The downside was that this vehicle was a real piece of shit. It had several major failures and got to the point where most employees refused to operate it. At the time, I was the night shift supervisor and had been asked for ideas on how to improve service. I was discussing this fact about the operators being hesitant with the GM and how they probably ought to consider leaving it in the shop for a few days and giving the maintenance team as much time as we could in order to fix these issues. Seemed like a decent sacrifice, maybe 5 days tops for months of good service. He couldn't understand why I'd suggest it. He just wanted to run it as much as possible until it broke down again, because then the ad revenue would surely have brought in enough by then to pay for the maintenance the car needed. I couldn't get him to understand that at the rate we were going, it would take months to get to that point, and when a vehicle fries its own brain because of the Texas heat, you're going to have a bad time. These failures would also delay the other vehicles in service, thus driving our passenger base away. It all came to an end when I was operating that vehicle on a typically hot August evening, and I was getting the warning that the computer was overheating. I was having to move one block at a time, alternating between moving and waiting 5 to 10 minutes for it to cool down enough to try again. After an hour or so, I'd made it halfway back to the garage. I tried moving it one more time, made it about 10 feet, and I heard the absolute loudest bang I've ever encountered. The computer fucking exploded. I laughed so hard I was crying. At that point, we couldn't get it back to the garage under its own power. I had to leave it there with another employee to flag traffic around the stalled vehicle, get in my automobile, and drive a few miles to the place where we kept our tow truck. Then I had to go through the whole process of getting the truck ready and driving this slow, lumbering beast all the way back to where the vehicle was stalled and tow it back to the garage, which in itself took the good part of an hour. After we got everything put away and the tow truck shut down, I went to the office, got on the computer, and sent a status report to the GM that basically said, this vehicle's brain exploded at XX tonight at intersection. It absolutely will not be moving on its own anytime soon. I have arranged to have the operators stay a little late tonight to help do you a favor by putting this in the back of the shop so it won't block in any of the vehicles that actually work. I sure hope that check from the ad company covers this. The GM wasn't happy with me, but I was so jaded at that point that I didn't give a fuck. As far as I know, the GM would only approve band-aid fixes. I don't think the vehicle got the modifications it really needed until after that guy got fired. Now it's an okay vehicle. The joys of working in public transit are endless, I'll tell ya. My first job out of college, I was a junior developer, working under a guy who thought he was God's gift to the internet. He wrote our company's eStore backend entirely in C, and that's in the late 2000s. PHP, Ruby, Net, Java, those are for idiots. Anyone can write a store website in that. A real man will use a non-garbage collected language, hosted by IICE, naturally. He had his own version control system JIT and SVN are for losers. Every time he changed the code he'd save a new copy of store.c with a number appended to the file name. I think when I left, the live version was store.c6. There were files numbered 1 to 10, but the live one was 6, because after he saved version 10, the next version went back to 1 again. When I complained, he said just check the timestamps, dummy. But wait, let's make this dumber. He didn't like writing HTML, so the entire front end of the site was just loading one monolithic JS file, which loaded a string of other JS files. The entire thing, all in static JS files. Sure, it takes about 30 seconds for the initial page load, but it's really fast after that. Mr. Genius didn't think databases were very interesting, so our inventory was stored in JS arrays in inventory.js. Our users' accounts were stored in passwords.js. In order to purchase on our site, you simply had to send an email to support with your desired username. He'd reply back with your password, and then he'd upload a new copy of passwords.js. I told him why not store that information in a database on the server? A hacker could easily just visit /passwords.js on our site and download every user's account at once. He sneered at me. Databases are a juicy target for hackers. Running one is like getting blood in the water. The sharks will come from miles around. But what kind of hacker would have the time to read down to line 897 of index.js to even see that a passwords.js file is being included? Oh boy, here we go. Meet my brother's girlfriend / baby mama. Here are the highlights. The first thing my brother noticed was that she never learned to read an analog clock. When my brother offered to teach her, she laughed at him and called him a pejorative word for a homosexual man. She believes that credit cards are free money, and the fact that she can't get another credit card for not paying was because the Jews were mad. She figured out how to get free money. She can't do math, like, at all. Single digit addition requires the use of fingers, and she still only gets the right answer about half the time. Subtraction is right out. She managed to get fired from 3 different jobs: food service / cleaning, in 4 months because she kept forgetting to go to work, and the people who ran the place were total dicks for firing her for forgetting one thing. She and my brother both got salmonella from eating food she cooked. After some questioning, she admitted that she cooked the chicken rare because that's how the expensive places do it. She can barely read and can't write anything more than a few simple words. She has actually drawn cryptic pictures instead of leaving a note for my brother. I thought my brother was joking and referencing Charlie Keller's illiteracy from It's Always Sunny. He wasn't joking and hadn't watched the show. The illiteracy was originally discovered because she had burned or undercooked a significant number of the pre-made frozen dinners my brother started buying after the chicken incident. She couldn't figure out the instructions, so she was just guessing. She kept saying that the oven was broken in my brother's apartment. She believed she couldn't get pregnant because her mom allegedly told her that only teenage girls get periods. Since her periods didn't magically stop on the day of her 20th birthday, she believed her womb was busted like her aunt's and she couldn't get pregnant. My brother, the second stupidest person I know, believed her and said that our mother, who is a nurse practitioner of gynecology, was full of shit. Naturally, she tested pregnant after 2 months of dating. Instead of admitting my mother was right, they believed their conception was a miracle from God. After the birth, she got a DUI with her 6-month-old in the car because she didn't know that the prescription painkillers she stole from her dad were considered an intoxicating substance. Also, she didn't have a driver's license or insurance. Her dad got her the car. She took too many of those painkillers and hit 3 parked cars, then got out to fight some random pedestrian on the sidewalk for running into her. She went to jail, and her moron mom got custody of the kid. CPS removed the child after less than 2 months because the child was losing weight. After questioning, her mom said she was teaching the baby not to throw food by sending her to bed hungry. Her mom was charged. Kid placed with foster family because her dad and aunt are felons and apparently both sets of grandparents have criminal histories too. She did 4 months in county while awaiting sentencing, but somehow she got off with time served, got custody of her kid, WTF, and only got 3 years of probation and a 6-figure fine, plus restitution for the vehicle damage, despite a felony conviction, WWTTTFFFF. She pretty much won the judicial fucking lottery, something called deferred adjudication. She celebrated her freedom by doing crack and failing her very first piss test with her probation officer. She claimed she didn't know crack was illegal. Crack. You know, the shit you can't buy from a fucking CVS. The shit you have to buy from a drug dealer. Kid was placed back with the foster family. My moron brother is convinced they're still in love and she'll be out in a few months because the judge will see her mistake. She won't. He also went to jail, again, for selling drugs at his workplace, again. I'm sure if I thought real hard I could come up with someone more stupid, but this story is pretty good. There was this receptionist at the veterinary office we have taken our dogs to over the years who argued with my dad about how to pronounce his own name. He went in to pick up some prescription something for our dog Daisy and this girl asked the typical name of dog, name of owner type questions. We have it listed as Michelle and you don't look like a Michelle, she says. Dad asked how it was spelled on the monitor and sure enough it was still spelled Michael, Dad's name. He said that says Michael. That's my name. And she argued with him about it. He had to get his driver's license out to show her, and even though she finally relented to let him pick up whatever it was he was down there to pick up, she was adamant my dad has been mispronouncing his own name for 50+ years. The best part is dad tells us this whole story and we think nothing of it till like 3 months later, when mom took the dog in for a checkup. The girl still thought the owner of the dog was Michelle, and that my mom must be in a lesbian relationship. Mom gently corrected the lady that it was Michael and again this girl was adamant it was pronounced Michelle. Mom, bemused, said something along the lines of it's literally a name from the Bible. It's pronounced Michael and has been for thousands of years. The receptionist sat in silence outside of the minimal amount of talking needed for the rest of that visit. Edit. Wow, this blew up. Woke up to like 200 responses, so I'll just respond here. Thanks for the heads up the Hebrew thing. In hindsight that was silly. Makes me wonder when exactly that spelling started to sound like we say it today. Also, this is just my recollection of the story because I heard it all secondhand through the parents, so I'm sure I've embellished it without realizing. And this was all over a decade ago anyway. As for Homegirl, she was very much typical white girl. My guess is she had a foreign friend that spelled her name that way and pronounced it Michelle, and she figured that was just the only possible way to say it. It's more the arguing over how to say it thing than anything else. Who argues with someone on how that person says their own name? In everyone's military career there is that guy you kind of want to help then realize it's a waste. That guy didn't just take the cake, he took the cherry on top too. First encounter with this guy was I found his weapon in a porta crapper. I walked out with my weapon and his, saw a high-ranking sergeant, and turned the weapon over to him. Turns out this was that guy's squad leader. 10 minutes later I see that guy doing rifle PT in full battle rattle with a sign around his neck stating, "I forgot my weapon in the shitter, don't be like me, I'm a dumbass." This would not be the last time he lost his weapon or important field gear. I found out later on the unit tried to dump this dude off onto another battalion. He got sent back to us for refusing to cut his hair and follow various other orders. When we were overseas, he had a random outburst in the chow hall, shouting, "You don't see a dick in my pussy." We found out it was because his ex-wife was dating other dudes. Later on he had his weapon taken away from him because he threatened to shoot people in his squad. Not long after that he was found masturbating to Family Guy. There were a slew of other things as well. After deployment that guy got put onto micro as my driver. He wasn't allowed to drink because he would get white girl wasted and overdramatic. He once threatened me that he was going to turn himself into the sheriff's office instead of reporting for duty because he got rejected by some girl. When I told him to do it because I'm not a babysitter, he started sobbing saying it was my job as his sergeant to fix his problems. Unfortunately, he showed up the next day for duty. For some reason he decided to tell the section he was a webcam model. We asked how he knew they were girls and not guys. He said, "You can tell." Turns out he was showing his dinghy to girls and dudes for $2.99 a minute. The night before going out to the field we do inspections to make sure everyone packed what they needed. He took it upon himself to wake up early to remove all his clean uniforms and clothing from his bags. So he left for 2 weeks in the field, no showering in the field, with field gear and the clothes on his back. We figured this out on day 3 when his stench was billowing out of his driver's hatch. Not to mention he was constantly masturbating in the hatch while we were still in the track. Just add that to the stench and critter fest that was going on up there. More often than not my number one man would have to punch the crap out him to wake him up when we got fire missions. He would give us life advice on how to scam the VAP, other forms of government such as food stamps, and told us an easy way to get free cash is to put your name on class action lawsuits. At one point he told me the army owed him his sergeant's stripes because he had been in for 9 years and it's the least they could do for him. I told him I would never allow that to happen as long as I was in the army. He had no filter for saying stupid things. It was like his burnout brain was directly linked to his mouth. Unfortunately for the rest of us in the crew, we wore CVC helmets, which meant you had constant communication with 3 other people. He was the bane of my existence for 3 years. In the end I got him to get out of the army. We all end up reflecting on that guy. People get annoyed that he is basically scamming $2,600 a month off of various assistance programs. I ask them, do you really want that guy in the workforce? This is the safest situation for all of us. Sleep easy at night knowing he isn't in the army anymore. Reddit. Well, unless you're in Iowa, then he might be trying to bang your daughter or son. Thank you so much for watching. Please like and subscribe the channel.